respected Hawaii economist Paul Brewbaker returned to EAH to share his insightful economic analysis. In this second video, he warns the federal budget deficit has not been balanced in a quarter century. The federal debt will rise from 100% of GDP to 130% of GDP, and the interest payments will soon exceed defense spending. On tariffs, Paul explains, Trump is focused on the merchandise deficits, not the U.S. capital investments, which overall exceed the merchandise deficits by $415 billion. But consumption and capital investment have been decelerating over the last year. Trump's call for tariffs has caused the highest jump in the economic uncertainty index in 20 years. Trump's effective tariff rate is currently estimated to be 18% and matches tariffs from 100 and 200 years ago when U.S. manufacturing was first developing.
Engineers and Architects of Hawaii has been meeting for over 120 years. The 1-hour lunchtime meetings on Fridays serves engineers, architects, technical professionals, and the public. We provide a venue for timely briefings and discussions of current and emerging technologies and important community issues. To continue to meet our goals, EAH needs the support from the community's technical professionals and the public. If you have or know of a relevant topic, contact EAH so we can arrange a date to present the topic at an EAH Friday meeting. Also, please join us at one of our live meetings, either in person or via Zoom. Past meetings are published on YouTube and on Hawaii's Olelo Community Television Channel 53. Visit the EAH website for publications, information, and links. Mahalo.
Thanks for inviting me back. It's been a while. So with apologies to any Trump supporters today, I'm afraid I'm going to have to take on some of these policies and critique them. The theme here is mostly about uncertainty and its role in the economic outlook. But this is more just, 5 things I'm sort of curious about these days that I don't hear anybody else talking about. So let's jump right in. We got GDP numbers that are confusing because they were negative in the first quarter, positive in second quarter. When you look at these components, and I'll point out the 2 that are probably the most important are the blue ones, which are consumption and investment. But the big movers in the first half of this year were net exports, which are negative in the first quarter because everybody was front running the tariffs by importing as much as they could before the tariffs came into place. So you import and then you pile that in inventories. And then in the second quarter, the imports disappeared while distributors burned off the inventories. So you got this wacky sort of, well, let's just take that stuff out. And you'll see that when you take out net exports and inventory changes, you can see how consumption and investment have been decelerating over the last year. And so again, one of the uncertainties and the risk for the second half of this year is, do consumers retrench? How much do businesses have to retrench? How many businesses no longer can really, be commercially viable if their import costs have gone up? And we're just, we don't know. Nobody's done this in 100 years or more, and we'll see what happens. Survey earlier this year that came out, this just talks about capital spending. My professional organization has this survey, and we all, write what we think is happening. And so this is an index of capital spending. And you can see between the recessions, there's sort of an inverted U-shaped arc. You don't want to see, or if you see one, you want to see it go back and, either continue going or have several waves as we did in the 2010s, which was the longest expansion in history. So we'll see. But again, capital spending represents firms' commitments to the future because they're investing in productive capacity, and that's under some pressure. The deficit, federal budget deficit, used to swing from negative to positive, right? So we go from deficit to surplus under Clinton, and then the Bush tax cuts, deficit moving towards surplus, but then came the recession, the Great Recession, and then the Obama recovery in the 2010s, but then the Trump tax cuts. And so we've been in this pattern where for the last quarter century, we never quite get back to balance. And in this and then of course, bad things happen. Worst recession since the Great Depression, the first pandemic in a century. And so it's trying to climb back out of the hole that's problematic. And if you look at the big BBB, whatever, the big bill, sorry, but I call it the big BS bill, but you can see that the projection is that we're just not going to get out of the hole for the remainder of the decade. Now, this isn't the version of the bill that passed, which is worse. I'll show you that in a second. Corresponding to deficits, right, are the accumulation, a net accumulation of public indebtedness. So right now we're going from about 100% of GDP to about 130% of GDP. You know, remember the days when you know, we had a surplus 25 years ago. So with any luck, the next generation, because I'm checking out, with any luck, the next generation will fix all the problems that the baby boomers left behind. Interest is going to be one of the big problems here, because interest on 130% of GDP debt is going to be bigger than defense spending. These are the final numbers. The version that passed the House had a $2.8 trillion cumulative deficit over the next 10 years. And then the Senate added another 450 billion. And then the final version passed with a $3.4 trillion cumulative increase in indebtedness on top of what's already there. So I'll say no more and focus instead on what I think is just kind of crazy. Just by the way, I did study actually international economics, and I taught international finance at the University of Wisconsin. And my first job in Hawaii when I came back was in the international division of Bank of Hawaii. It's like I came back to do international economics. So I don't know how well you can see this color, but the merchandise deficit that the administration is concerned about is offset, of course, by a capital account surplus plus surplus on the services account. So we don't make things. We have other people make things. And then we provide digital services to the rest of the world. We code the AI or whatever, and or train the AI on large language models that are sourcing off of the amazing engineering scientific literature that's there to be scanned by the robots. But of course, the other part of it is if the rest of the world wants to invest in America, then why would we? They want to build buildings. Knock yourself out. You take the risk. We'll work in the buildings. And that's the capital side of the balance, right? So payments have to balance. So our merchandise trade deficits, about 4% of GDP, are systematically have been for the last 40 years maybe. Or this is when I first worked at Bank of Hawaii. This is when they hired me full time. This is when I was teaching international. So yeah, we did that, and nothing wrong with it. If you look at again, the colors aren't coming through here as well, but I'll give you an example. There's a non-deal deal with the Europeans on trade, and U.S. has a bilateral merchandise trade deficit with respect to the Europeans of about 240 billion, but then we have a 450 billion portfolio surplus. So again, as long as the Europeans want to buy NVIDIA stock, we'll take the money and we'll build data centers that they're paying for, and then we'll buy French wine with the So is that a problem for the Trump administration? It is, and they're focused on the merchandise deficits, and there's some question about the legality of whether it whether it objectively constitutes a national security threat. But that's being oral arguments today, I think, in one of the appeals circuits about the application of that law. Never been applied in this case, and the word tariff doesn't appear in the law. We do have an experience with Trump 1.0, so just to be sure about how this works, these are Chinese imports on the left, American imports from China on the left, and then U.S. production on the right. Percent changes from 2018 to 2021, of the Trump 1.0 tariffs on motor vehicles and motor vehicle parts, on furniture, computer equipment, semiconductors, and apparel. So yes, taxes on imports reduce the amount, right? We have to pay the taxes, so we're not going to buy as many, whatever. But the objective, to the extent it's about increasing U.S. production, doesn't always work the way you think, because maybe the production will just move to Vietnam, right? Rather than North Carolina, or, rather than back to, South Carolina. And you look, there's a lot of these states like the Carolinas where it had big textile industries, and then it moved to China, and then it moved to Vietnam. I think I'm wearing Vietnamese shoes right now, which are Rockports from Rockport, Massachusetts. As of yesterday, no, 2 days ago, and of course it changes every day, I'm sure it's different now, the effective tariff rate, so the trade-weighted tariff rate, is proposed or being implemented today, implemented this month, is about 18%. And to put that in historic context, I know a lot of people saying, well, that goes back to the Smoot-Hawley tariff of the 1930s, which is true. But personally, I think it's interesting that it goes back to the tariff rate after the initial imposition of infant industry tariffs by Alexander Hamilton, as seen on Broadway, and 200 years ago. But more importantly, we spent 80 years getting it down to 2.5%. 18 is going to be a big lift. 18 on average, instead of 2.5%. So somebody's got to pay. And that's what we're all talking about now. As I say, uncertainty about where it ends up. This is a survey from this month with my organization. This one, the Business Conditions Survey. Survey says somewhere around 20% is the right number. And then to what extent will tariffs reshore manufacturing? A survey from June, again, in my organization. Kind of a split between might work a little, won't work at all. I don't know. To me, it's sort of like, I worked a little bit on the wildfire recovery stuff, for an acronym. And then at the end of last year, I made this presentation at DBED, actually, or the planners and everybody. And it was like a wrap-up presentation of all the work we'd done. And somebody says, oh, well, the Mayor Bisson has a new community-based economic recovery plan for Maui. I'm like, oh, awesome. What's in it? Number one priority, agriculture. And I was like, that agriculture is 0.2% of Maui GDP, right? So again, these people who want manufacturing to come back, I'm kind of like, maybe they still are thinking about the world in the 1930s or in the 1830s. Because those are the kinds, right? We're going to put tariffs in like the ones in the 1830s so that we can make our own trains instead of buying them from Germans or Koreans. Okay, well, you get the picture. I love this index of trade policy uncertainty. So here's what you do. You have a large language model, and you're continuously scanning 5,000 global media outlets, looking for mentions of uncertainty that can be attributed directly to trade policy. And so Nick Bloom and Steve Davis at Stanford have, and I left somebody's name out, there's a remarkable index. As soon as 2.0 comes in, there's the uncertainty. So yes, people are really freaking out about this. Although you could say, okay, it's getting better, but that's the kind of shock to people's thinking. Like, you knew it was coming because it's Trump, but who knew it was going to be a 20% tariff, right? And what does that even mean? How do we even process what the economic impacts are going to be?
In the next two videos, Paul focuses on Hawaii's economy. The longest expansion in U.S. history ended with COVID, But Hawaii's economy started its downturn in 2017, with the start of anti-science and anti-tourism forces. Hawaii's pandemic recovery was impacted by people working from home. He also explains why Maui condos prices first increased, but then fell after the wildfire.
Yeah, we'll get your picture.
Thank you very much. Oh, yes.
For those of us with jobs, have fun going back.
All right. Yeah.
Engineers and architects of Hawaii welcome your comment on this program and any of our recent programs. We encourage your direct participation in this community outreach, so please email us your comments and ideas at eahawaii@gmail.com.